This might be the best preloaded subwoofer box on Amazon. Plus, it is a fantastic value. Don't believe me? Watch and find out. This is a 12-inch Stinger subwoofer mounted in a Stinger prefabricated subwoofer box. I'll be sure to drop a link to this thing down in the video description so that you can check it out. The first thing that jumps out at you are these dog ears right here. These are feet that give you clearance so you can aim the subwoofer down. No other subwoofer enclosure at this price point is going to include this feature. The exterior fit and finish is top quality. Check out these flawless seams and the stitching on the logo. The back of the enclosure is slanted, so you can put this up against the back seats and fire the sub toward the trunk opening. When you do that, that Stinger logo will be on the top of the enclosure. And if you fire the sub down, you can have the logo face the trunk opening. I think this would look great if you were to add some LEDs to it to get some underglow lighting. And of course, if you don't want to see the logo, you can just turn it around. Looking at the port, you can see that it has a 45-degree flare. That will cut down on port noise, which will improve the overall sound quality. Right here, you can see the only fit and finish issue that I could find with the enclosure. The carpet in the port is a little bit loose. Speaking of the port, let's check out the port tuning. This black box right here is a DAT. You just hook it up to the terminals on the outside of the box, plug it into the computer, launch the software, and run a sweep. If you want to know more about the DATs and what it can do, keep watching. We'll talk about that a little later. And if you do that, you will find the tuning frequency of your ported enclosure right here at the bottom of this dip. One reason why prefab enclosures have a bad reputation is because the cheap ones are flimsy, they lack sufficient airspace, and they're tuned far too high. I have several examples of prefab boxes on my channel. I'll be sure to give you a link so that you can check them out. I like the tuning of this box. 34 Hertz is just about right, especially if you want a good sound quality enclosure. You want to see your sound quality enclosure somewhere between 32 and 36 Hertz depending on the subwoofer. That's going to give you a nice flat frequency response above the port tuning. And that's exactly what I suspect this one's going to give us. Keep watching to find out. Now, if you're not into sound quality and loud is your goal, you want to shoot for something closer to 40 Hertz when you tune your port. If you want something really windy, you shoot for a lower tuning frequency, something below 32 Hertz. And for home theater, you want to shoot even lower, something definitely below 30, maybe even as low as 20 or even lower. And those are just general rules of thumb. Every car in every room is different, so you will get different results depending on your application. But so far, this application is shaping up to be really nice. This is a really good box. Why don't we hook it up in a vehicle and do some more tests? It would be really cool if we had an amp that we could match with this sub. It turns out that Stinger sells a 700 watt 1 ohm amp, and this is a 700 watt 1 ohm subwoofer. How's that for a coincidence? If you buy them both on Amazon right now, you can get the whole set for under 300 bucks. Throw in a 4-gauge wire kit, and this is probably the best bang for the buck entry-level system on the market right now. For this demonstration, I've set the gain with 0 dB of overlap. I did that on purpose so I could crank it all the way up without clipping. I don't want to destroy the sub, it's just too nice for that. Plus, this demonstration will give you a more realistic, real-world idea of what you should expect with a setup in your daily driver. The biggest number I saw on the meter was 131.1 dB at 50 Hertz. After impedance rise, we were seeing about 4.7 ohms and somewhere between 330 and 340 watts. No doubt we could hit a bigger number. This amp definitely has more power to give. When I dynoed the amp, it had no trouble exceeding its rated power, and I was able to get almost 1200 watts on a reactive load. Now, I did those tests with the subwoofer firing forward, and I know what you're all gonna ask. Will it play louder down firing? Let's find out. Anything below 40 Hertz is louder in the down firing position. Anything above 40 Hertz is louder in the front fire position. Now, in order for you to hear that, you need at least 1 dB of difference between the two. That is literally the definition of a dB. And that did happen, but at only these two frequencies here. Keep in mind, this is not a scientific experiment. The difference you're seeing here can easily fall within the margin of error for this demonstration. So I'm going to call the result inconclusive. Your results are going to depend on your vehicle. In either position, this is plenty loud for a budget build or for a daily driver. Plus, at these power levels, you don't have to burn a bunch of extra money on expensive electrical upgrades. Before we move on from the plot, notice that between 40 and 60 Hertz, the results are fairly flat. If you're interested in sound quality, flat is what you want. It may not look flat, but if you look closer at the scale, you can see that from 40 Hertz up to its peak, you've only got about a 2 dB difference in output. Anytime someone shows you a graph, always pay attention to the scale. I can change the scale to make it look like anything that I want.
Before we get much further in the video, I just want to point out that I did not get this from Stinger. I bought this with my own money. I don't think Stinger even knows who I am. So if you like what I'm doing on this channel and you want me to buy more gear to review, you can support me by hitting the join button down at the bottom of the video, or you can join me over on Patreon.
We've not even gotten to the best part. This box has a surprise inside. But let's give it a listen before we take it apart. Here's a short clip of some YouTube approved music. Now, I think it sounds great, and that is entirely subjective. But I will say this, price to performance, this thing punches well above its weight. A comparable product from something like Scar is rated for less power and is about 10 or 15 bucks more. How about if we crack it open so you can see how well it's built? The first thing I notice is that the sub is mounted with machine screws. That means we should expect to find some T-nuts inside when we pull the sub out. Speaking of which, I had a little trouble getting the sub out. I managed to round out several of the Phillips head screws. Now, I don't know if that's because Stinger added some Loctite to these things or if some super glue got on the threads when they installed the subwoofer. In any case, the screws are not going to back out on you while you're playing music. I actually ended up completely rounding out one of the screws, so I had to grab some locking pliers to get it out. That was a pain, let me tell you. Then I noticed something really odd. The sub did not just pull right out of the box. At first I thought that I'd left a screw in. Then I realized the subwoofer was actually stuck in place. And right here is why. Check out this internal brace. It's got a central hub with spokes, and that hub is covered with something that looks like felt. The magnet press fits into that circle, and that felt forms a gasket. The brace not only braces the enclosure, it also provides additional support for the sub and additional bracing for the subwoofer itself. I have never seen that in a prefab enclosure. I don't think I've ever seen that in a custom enclosure. That's a really nice touch. And if you ask me, something like that really kicks this enclosure up to the next level. But we're not done looking at the inside of the box yet. We see some nice thick speaker wire. It looks like 10 or 12 gauge. That is really overkill for this subwoofer, which is good because overkill is what you want. The box uses 3/4 inch material all around. It is lined with polyfill. The speaker wire is connected to the terminal cup with ring terminals. Stinger really went above and beyond with all the details inside of this enclosure. The only improvement I would suggest is a double baffle. The subwoofer itself is sturdy and straightforward. It weighs in at about 15 2/3 pounds. It looks like a paper cone with a stamped frame. There's nothing wrong with a stamped frame. That type of frame is plenty strong for a subwoofer of this size and power. And it's what you would expect at this price point. Stamped frames are cost effective. There are plenty of other great subwoofers out there like the Savard Rap series and the Dayton Audio MX series that also use stamped frames. On that stamped frame, we have some venting, and there's also a nice big pole vent on the back of that beefy double stacked magnet. In this shot right here, you can see the spider, and you will notice this subwoofer uses insulated tinsel leads. It is a dual 2-ohm subwoofer that was wired in parallel. The speaker connections on the subwoofer are push terminals. Stinger even took the extra time to tin the wires when they mounted the sub in the box. So this thing is well built, it sounds great, and it's priced to sell. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it for an entry-level system. To learn more about the DATs, click right here. To see the dyno of the amp that I showed you earlier in the video, click right here. Before I go, I need to say thank you to my patrons with an extra shout out to $25 patrons, Jonas, Sean, David, Fargo, JD Merica, Baba, Bo, and Dylan. I'm Justin, this is the DIY Audio Guy YouTube channel, and I will see you on the next adventure.